There are all kinds of people out there, both in Israel and overseas, unfortunately. There are many Jews, ostensibly, and you would think plainly and obviously, incontrovertibly dati, shall we say, with the strangest ideological notions and assumptions. Truly strange. It's difficult. Sometimes it's difficult to comprehend even. In this yeshuv, as in many yeshuvim over the past year or two, there has been discussion about disallowing any Arabs to enter the yeshuv for whatever reason. There have been a number of yeshuvim of which I'm aware that have recently. There were arguments and discussions. Eventually, they had some kind of a vote, and in certain yeshuvim they voted against it, even though there were people who thought it was a mistake for various reasons. Usually, sometimes the reasons people provide are of a more pragmatic nature, saying if that's the case, then we can't build more houses in this yeshuv or something like that because there's no one to build them. Or as the expression goes, en Aravim en pigumim, as opposed to en piguim, right? And Aravim and Piruim, of course, means if there are no Arabs and there are no violent Islamo-Nazi attacks. So there's a new expression which is the argument presented by some, that is, instead of En Aravim en Piguim, which is an expression that's been around for decades, I think. Now it's been reversed. It's been turned on its head by some. En Aravim en Pigumim, no scaffolding, no building activity. But there are others who explain their opposition to such a policy because once upon a time in another country, a certain country in Central Europe, the Jews were not allowed to enter this or that place, or were driven out of this profession or this town or what have you, and now you're suggesting we do the same to someone else. It's so inane and an insult to the intelligence. It's difficult to know even how to respond or whether one should respond. But there are plenty of people in this yeshuv who think that way. For example,
I thought Neve Daniel was a much more right-wing place than other yeshuvim.
No, I wish that were true, but it's not so. It's not so at all. Well, look, there's in general, I think it's fair and true to say. I think it's objectively true to say that the first two yeshuvim in Gush Etzion, in the wake of the 6-Day War, was the return to Kibbutz Kfar Etzion, which had existed before Toshin Heth and had been conquered by the Jordanians, and people were taken captive and what have you.
That's the one with the tree?
Sorry?
That's the one with the famous tree?
Well, there's the famous tree that was visible from, I don't know from where exactly, somewhere in southern Yerushalayim, and people used to go and see it and look at it and what have you. Yeah, so that tree is still there. I think they built some kind of what's the term? I don't know, some kind of memorial or something around it. I believe the tree is there, and Kfar Etzion was resettled, repopulated, etc., going back. I think shortly after the 6-Day War. I think within a year or two, and then you had Alon Shavuot. Alon Shavuot, in some ways, was established at least and initially settled, and to this day I think it's also true, by the most classic dyed-in-the-wool religious Zionist type people, which is really not a good start. and then the yeshiva was established there. Yeshivat Har Etzion. This was headed by initially by Rav Amital, who initially at that point was most definitely identified with what was called then Gush, if you heard of such a term, which was the settlement movement and ideological focus of many in the Dati Lumi world at that time. We're talking, but it really, Gush got off the ground after the Yom Kippur War. It was a kind of reaction to the despondency that took over many people at that time, and that's really how Gush got off the ground. And their initial focus was in the Shomron. So the initial Yeshuvim were Elon Moreh and Kedumim, whereas Alon Shavut, I'm not sure exactly what year it got off the ground, but it may have preceded that time. May have. Kfar Etzion certainly preceded that. Anyway, so the Yom Kippur War seems to have broken Rav Amital. I think there were something like 7 or 8 students from the yeshiva who were killed in the war, which, when you think about it, sounds, we dare not say trivial, but not even close to what we've experienced recently, and yet that seems to have broken him. And all of a sudden he became almost, you could say, a peacenik. And he began supporting land for peace ideas. And if you recall, or if you read about this, he joined a government headed by Shimon Peres. He was a minister, a cabinet minister of some sort. I can't remember, but he was definitely. He most definitely joined himself, affiliated with the more left, the left part, the leftist part of the spectrum. Unfortunately, this is on top of the fact that I don't know the exact year, but probably something like Tavshin Lamed Aleph or Lamed Bet. I'm guessing. He invited Rav Aaron Lichtenstein from the US to come and join the yeshiva and be co-rosh yeshiva, something like that. And Rav Lichtenstein's ideas are, and this is why we got onto this, I suppose, onto this discussion, because clearly you would think a from Jew on the one hand, on the other hand, espousing certain ideas that are completely divorced from the Torah, to the extent that let me quote something, show you something here in the Rambam, which you're probably familiar with, but for our own personal benefit right now, to refresh our memories and for the benefit of anyone else who may be listening. Alright, so this is the beginning of Sefer Nezikin, or Nezikim as it's menukad here. And in Chot Rotzeach U'Shmirat Nefesh, it says here, if you can see, Yesh Bichlalan Sheva Yisra Mitzvot, Sheva Mitzvot Aseh, U'Asar Mitzvot Lo Ta'aseh, Uzel Peratan, Shelo Ridsoach. So here it just says Lo Ridsoach, not to murder. That would be the literal translation. If you look, however, at the beginning of Perek Aleph, here it says, in Chot Rotzeach U'Shmirat Nefesh, Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph, Kol Horeg Nefesh Adam Yisrael, Over Belo Ta'aseh. Which means that if murdering. In other words, murder is not harigah. Just as in English, you have killing and you have murder, two different verbs, which refer to two different situations. So we're talking about unjustified and inexcusable taking of life for no reason at all, or because you're angry, or because you don't like the person, or something like that, but not for any cogent reason. Self-defense would be one obvious example, but there might be others. There most certainly are others. So here it says, Kol oreg nefesh adam Yisrael. If you look up Tfus Vilna, for example, of the Rambam, it says, Kol oreg nefesh adam Yisrael is gone. Although in the first printing of the Rambam from Rome in Shnat Resh Mem, it says explicitly what it says here. Even the first printing, it's correct. Not to mention all the manuscripts. But in Vilna it says Kol oreg nefesh adam over b'lo ta'aseh. So Rav Lichtenstein, for example, and I wrote about this in one of the first articles I published, which is on a book on the shelf here next to me, I believe, somewhere. There's a lengthy article there in which I endeavor to demonstrate the clear distinction made by the Torah between a Jew and a non-Jew. In multiple and various areas of life in Torah and existence in general. And as much as possible, I base it on explicit halachot, which you really cannot argue with. Because when it comes to the realm of Jewish thought, philosophy, Kabbalah, etc., you can find perhaps different opinions or different emphases, what have you. But in halacha is halacha. It should be cut and dried. It should be straightforward. So it was in Taushin Mem Dalet, if I'm not mistaken, 1984, Leminyanom, that the so-called Jewish underground came to light. We're talking about a period, of course, when there had been an ongoing war already being waged against the Jewish people by the Islamo Nazis in Yudan and Shomron and Azar, in the form of throwing of rocks at traveling cars, petrol bombs, knifings. Shootings at that time were less common, but many Jews had been killed, injured, etc. Anyway, so this so-called Jewish underground formed, and they if I'm not mistaken, they managed to plant a bomb under the car of the mayor of Shechem, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe there were two such cases, but at any rate. And I think they managed to injure his legs or blow off his legs or something. As I recall, he did not die. And anyway, so this whole business came to light, and it's a long story. I won't go into it. And there is what to say about it, but that's not for another time. And certain people, like Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, were outraged. How could people do such a thing? And he wrote some article in the journal of Hakibutz Hadati, as I recall it. I quoted from it in this article that I wrote, word for word, in which he quoted the Rambam that we just were looking at here, where he quoted it as Kol Horeg Nefesh Adam. This was after the Shabtai Frankel edition of Sefer Nezikin had already been out for at least a couple of years, if not more. I think more like 8 years or something like that. Certainly 6 years. I recall this much. I know the first volume, which I have here, Sefer Zemanim, I think that was the first one that came out. I already purchased in either the end of Telshin Amud Zain or the beginning of Telshin Amud Het. And the Zikino, I think, was the next one to come out. At any rate, so the yeshivat Etzion is supposed to have one of the best furnished and supplied Torah libraries in the country, perhaps in the world. So how could he quote that Rambam in that fashion? If you want to claim, as he does in his article, that the Ra'avan says otherwise, that's entirely true. You can ask why the Ra'avan says otherwise, and that's a legitimate question. And the Ra'avan does say that it applies to a non-Jew as well, equally. He could also have pointed out that the Ba'ala Yira'im, he writes explicitly that killing a non-Jew is a sumi divrei sofarim. It's a tolada, he says, of the misvat lo ta'aseh. That's what he writes explicitly. But he's quoting the Rambam. All right, fine. So the Rambam doesn't say what he claims it says. I think that was a deliberate misrepresentation of the Rambam. It doesn't seem reasonable to me to suggest that it was just an innocent mistake. If it's an innocent mistake, it's also fairly serious, because you should check such things more diligently. At any rate, the same Rav Lichtenstein wrote a lengthy letter to Harav Avram Shapira, who was previously had been Rav Rashi and was the Rosh Yeshiva of Merkaz Harav. When Sharon decided to withdraw from Rethuat Azah, and Rav Shapira was opposed and said so, and said people would refuse orders and what have you. Rav Lichtenstein found it correct and necessary to write a lengthy letter, coming up with all kinds of halachic arguments why there was no Isur involved in withdrawing from Rethuat Azah. I will not here discuss the wisdom or lack of wisdom demonstrated by writing such a letter, which I have on my computer, which I can send you if you want it. But it's really not it doesn't bear serious consideration, obviously, for obvious reasons. Whether one considers destroying a Beth Knesset or acting in such a way which will bring about the destruction of Beit Knesset, if one considers that to be a suminat Torah midivrei sofarim, is really not the issue when it comes to whether one should withdraw from Rethuat Azah or not. But this is one of the points that he raises in his letter, for example. Totally inane. I'm mentioning all of this because it just shows you how deep these various forms of ideological and cultural corruption, how deep they run, how pernicious they can be. So, that being the yeshiva that has existed here in Gush Etzion since for the past at least it's almost, I think it's nearly 60 years, but certainly 55 years or something like that. In some ways, it has set the tone, and there are many people who live in Gush Etzion who studied in that yeshiva, and as a result, many of them, I would think it's even fair to say most of them, are completely bamboozled and living in some kind of haze, intellectual haze, which I think most of them have never been able to rid themselves of. So it's a very sad and problematic situation.